delighted that our friends from Brookline, the Brookline League of Women Voters, have joined us in sponsoring this important presentation on how to write a warrant article. We would also like to thank BIG for live streaming this event on their website and on our community cable channels. Why is tonight's presentation important? Warrant articles are the basis of our unique town meeting form of government. It only takes 10 signatures of registered voters to submit an article for inclusion in the warrant of a town meeting or special town meeting. Writing a good article is not as simple as it looks. They need to be clear, they need to fall within the law, and they need to avoid unintended consequences. Tonight, we're excited to have two very active members of our community give us a refresher on best practices on how to write a warrant article. Neil Gordon is a town meeting member from Precinct 1, current member of the town's Fiscal Advisory Committee, co-chair of Brookline PACs, a town constable, and a frequent warrant article petitioner. Sean Lynn-Jones is also a town meeting member from Precinct 1, former chair of the town's Fiscal Advisory Committee, member of the Committee on Town Organization and Structure, president of the Brookline Green Space Alliance, and a member of the League of Women Voters. After the two speakers present, we will have time for a question and answer segment. If you'd like to ask a question, please add your name to or question to the chat. And now a few words from our friends at the League. Diana?
Thank you. Yeah, good evening. I'm Diana McClure, Chair of the Steering Committee of the League of Women Voters. And our purpose is voter education and civic engagement. So we're delighted to be collaborating with the Town Meeting Members Association on this How to Write a Warrant Article forum. And we also want to thank BIG again for their continued collaboration in with this event, running the Zoom, live streaming on the BIG and YouTube channel and on the television channels. This is being recorded, so it will be available within a few days on the BIG website. So those who couldn't attend tonight or those who do can review it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana. So now Neil and Sean, take it away.
Can
Sure,
you
thanks,
bring
thanks
up our
everybody.
slide? As host, can you put up the first slide, the before the filing deadline? Is that possible?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
And thank you for scheduling this particular program before the filing deadline. Okay, so great to be here with Sean. This is a presentation that we did before. Pre-COVID, we did it in the live in the Denny room over at the health department. Great to be back. Great to have it on Zoom and the ability to record it. What you'll see as we go through this presentation is we've broken it down into two broad categories for each section. One is technical. That's really the how do you do it? What are the compliance steps? And the other side is political. Brookline Town Meeting is the town's legislature, and to suggest that the legislature doesn't include politics is just a tad naive, perhaps. So we break it down into those two particular areas, and I think we can get right into where do we start from a technical point of view. You can who's there we go. So this is what has to happen before the filing deadline. The warrant is now open. That was set by the select board, and the warrant has an absolute hard 12 noon closing time and date. And the date that the warrant closes this year is, Sean has it handy?
February 28th.
February 28th. At February 29th, there is no opportunity to file your warrant article. And so respect the filing deadline. Lots of people come in right at the last minute, the morning of, some at 2 minutes to noon, cuts it a little bit close. But those dates are set. So in the how to write a warrant article, good form helps to begin with. Go to the town website, town meeting files, find the warrant for prior town meetings, and find a warrant article. They're all printed in their entirety. Find a warrant article that is in common in form with what it is you're trying to accomplish. So there are bylaw amendments and other binding actions, resolutions, and home rule petitions. Follow that form. You need to draft both the warrant article and separately draft an explanation. In doing that, once you have a pretty good draft, the moderator and town council are both there to help. They will not weigh in on good, bad, or otherwise, but they will help you as to form, and town council's office will help you as to legal structure and legality, as to whether there are any questions, whether the action that you're asking for is within the authority of town meeting. Petitions require the signatures of at least 10 registered Brookline voters. Be sure, if you're only going to have 10 signatures on a petition, that your signers are actually registered Brookline voters. Best practice is to have more than 10, a comfortable number more than that. If you know that your signers are town meeting members, select board members, people otherwise active, you've got a better chance that they actually know that they're Brookline voters. If you submit a petition late, as in right before the deadline, the town clerk will check your signatures on the petition, and if it turns out you have fewer than 10, it's wait until next time, because there's no way to make that up. Petitions have to be submitted in person, on time. They go to the 6th floor, the select board office at town hall. The signatures all need to be so-called wet signatures. They need to be real signatures. There is no form of petition. It's not a form you ask for. You didn't go to the town clerk and say, I want to write a warrant article. It's just a paper. Put the title of your warrant article at the top. Put your name on it as petitioner. Put lines on it, and just have columns for signature. A good place to print your name, because not everybody's signature has anything to do with what their name is, their home address, and their precinct. And then off
We
you
have
go.
a question. Should we take them now, or should the people wait?
Yeah, so we can take them if they're clarification questions. Yeah, so we'll either answer them shortly, or we'll just pick them up again at the end.
Okay, so Anthony Bono has his hand up.
Yes. Hi, Neil. Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Quick
good to see you.
question. Good to see you. Do we need to have it checked by town council prior to submitting it, or is that after we submit it?
So once you submit a warrant article,
Yeah.
and the deadline is gone, you're not able to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are questions as to form, as to legality, can I do this? Is there a best way to do this? Do it early, so that you have an answer from town council, because what you submit will be printed verbatim in the warrant.
So it cannot be changed after that. Gotcha. Okay. Understood. Thank you.
I have a couple of additional comments on these matters to add, Neil.
Mm-hmm.
First, on this using prior warrant articles as a model for good form, as Neil pointed out, you can find these if you're willing to dig into the town website under town meeting files. You can find the combined reports, and you can actually trace now what happened to the original warrant articles as they went through the process and changed. And one thing that's important to remember is that there almost always is some kind of change. Warrant articles are written with 2C in the first line and or act on anything relative thereto at the end. And they provide a framework for motions that could be offered under that general category. And when they're put in motion form and voted, they begin with voted and a colon, and or anything there too disappears from the end. Why does all of this matter? Because the whole point of a warrant, in terms of our political system, is to warn town meeting and the town that certain issues will be considered. And that's why there's a warrant and why it's circulated. And I'm going to get to something that's more for the advanced class, but that is the question of scope. We'll return to that later. But when you're writing a warrant article, thinking about scope matters, and it's complicated because amendments and changes can only be within the scope. I'll give you a simple example. Let's say you want to have a change to our zoning that says we should have bigger front yard setbacks, but only north of Beacon Street. Now, whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not going to comment on. But someone might say, hey, I want to amend that. I want to have that cover south of Beacon Street too. That would not be within the scope of the warrant article, nor would an amendment to say that all buildings should now be subject to a 10-story limit instead of whatever they are currently. And it matters because sometimes it's good to have a very broad scope to allow for a lot of amendments. And sometimes if you don't want a lot of amendments, you narrow the scope. But that's the advanced class. Another point that's worth talking about is what should go into your explanation. Well, you can find the explanations for prior warrant articles on that town meeting file section of the town website, and that helps. Sometimes making it short and sweet is the way to go. But sometimes that explanation is going to be used by, for example, the advisory committee subcommittee when it does its write-up and reports on the warrant article to town meeting. Having some data in there can help that subcommittee write the report. And sometimes you'll find that when your article is reviewed, people keep saying, well, where's the data to support this? You seem to want to make front yard setbacks bigger, but how many front yards would be affected by this? How many of them are too small? And can you explain your basis for this? And that's something that's worth putting in an explanation, because you'll often be quizzed on that. And if you don't have a good answer, committees are less likely to support your article. So I think that's all I have to add here. We're going to come back to some of those themes later. But the prior warrant articles give you a great idea of what they're supposed to look like. And I think Neil hinted at this. Take some time to write them well, because it drives the advisory committee in particular crazy when it has to edit and revise something that's not really comprehensible in its initial form, or that has ambiguities to create some real legal issues and unintended consequences. Town council can help a lot with that, and so can the moderator.
Right. Just one comment on the relationship of your warrant to your warrant article explanation. The warrant article itself is what you want town meeting to vote on, more specifically the motion, but in more cases than not, what you're asking town meeting to vote on pretty much is what you draft in your warrant article. In Sean's example, that might be change the second sentence of article XX.X from no more than 12 to no more than 14. That's pretty cryptic, right? The explanation doesn't go in the warrant article. The explanation goes in the in the explanation. So depending upon how straightforward your warrant article may be, will influence what you need to put into your explanation. We can go to the next slide.
I'll take this one.
Right,
if
go.
you don't mind.
I don't mind. I'll jump in if I mind.
There are different kinds of warrant articles, and the differences really depend on what you're trying to accomplish. Maybe the most common, type of warrant article changes local bylaws or zoning. We have two different sets of bylaws in Brookline, but they can both be changed by town meeting. And we've had various examples in recent years allowing for different kinds of new construction under zoning, changing the requirements for removing snow from your sidewalk after a storm, All of those are in the local bylaw category. And they usually have some effect, or they should. The whole point is to regulate behavior or allow different activities to take place in the town. Then we have warrant articles that try to change state law, but just for Brookline, home rule petitions. Town meeting recently voted a home rule petition that would ask the state to give Brookline the authority to reintroduce rent control. To simplify it, but in a nutshell, that's what's that was in that home rule petition. And we've had many others, because under state law, there are only certain things that Brookline can do unless the legislature allows it to go beyond those restrictions. Home rule petitions have had mixed success on Beacon Hill. Sometimes the state accommodates Brookline, sometimes it doesn't. There is a general feeling that Brookline generates far more than its fair share of these petitions, and that leads to the argument that we should be a little bit more selective about what we ask the legislature to do, be that as it may. Then one can ask more generally for the state to change the law for the entire state. Raise the speed limit to 95 miles an hour, or reduce it to 55. Increase taxes, reduce taxes. There are so many different things that could be done. Town meeting can't require that, but it can be the sense of town meeting in a resolution to go ahead and ask the state legislature to make that change. Now, this fourth category is a little bit more controversial sometimes. Resolutions for urging action or raising awareness. In this category, there might be a resolution that calls on the United States government to give more military aid to Ukraine, or condemn one party, another party, or any party in the Middle East for its violent activities, or more general international or US political questions. But resolutions can also be directed be targeted at the town of Brookline and some of its bodies. For example, and this is a resolution that I was very much involved in, a few years ago, we had a resolution that asked the planning department to study ways to prevent houses from being torn down, basically, and to report back to town meeting. That had no binding force, but it was an advisory, urging of action from town meeting. And the planning department did indeed come back with a warrant article at the next town meeting that was approved by that town meeting. So there are different kinds of resolutions, and there is some concern that sometimes the international political ones take up too much time, but a resolution can be very important just within the Brookline context too. Once you've figured out what you're trying to do and which category of warrant article you're going to write, line up support. You can privately talk to members of boards, committees, and commissions. You should try to figure out the financial or budget implications. And I know that's hard if you're just a citizen writing a warrant article, but it's worth asking any affected department whether a new bylaw is going to force them to hire more people or impose excessive demands on the department, or simply be impossible to enforce. This is the kind of discussion that took place, for example, as we considered the tree protection bylaw over several years. Town staff generally don't want to be political. They don't want to endorse or oppose a warrant article, but they will tell you, if town meeting approves that, we would need to hire 2 more people to make it work. And that's an important consideration to be aware of. And you can bet the advisory committee is going to ask the same question. And you can, of course, line up more broadly thought leaders, elected officials at both the state and local level, and think about people who would speak to town meeting and would be effective speakers at town meeting. And I don't want to make town meeting sound like 5th grade in the popularity context, but it's important to get speakers and supporters in favor of your article who are respected and persuasive. And as you're thinking about the political dimensions, that's important to do. One final note here, this slide began with talking about changes to local bylaws. The bylaws are posted on the town website. If you go to the town clerk section and then click on bylaws, you'll find them. However, they may not be completely up to date. And so if you want to make sure that what you're looking at is the current language, check with the town clerk. Sometimes there's a lag between what town meeting votes and the website getting updated. And sometimes there's a lag between town meeting voting and the state attorney general's office approving a bylaw change. And so it's not yet in effect and not yet posted, but may well be by the time you get to the end of the warrant article process. And it's important to know that.
So
Finally,
let me add this.
Go ahead, Neil.
Let me add this first to lining up support. So as this slide was drafted, that is lining up support early, support for your idea, support for your solution. Have conversations and find out whether people in a leadership position or staff, as the case may be, number one, agree that what you see as an issue or a problem is in their mind also an issue or a problem. And if they do agree, that they agree that your solution as proposed in your warrant article is actually a viable solution versus some other solution. And I want to go back just for a sec to influencing the legislature. And I'll give you a tighter example. If you believe that 16 and 17-year-olds should vote, period, 16 and 17-year-olds should have the right to vote, you could go to a town meeting with a resolution that says, skip the details of the whereas clauses, and we ask the legislature to take up and pass legislation statewide allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. Or you could say, we'll file this as a home rule petition, and we will ask the legislature to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in Brookline. Those are both asks. They're in effect both resolutions asking the legislature to do something. What I've heard our state representative, this Tommy Vitolo, say many times, he doesn't take positions on home rule petitions because if it passes, he will carry that home rule petition to Beacon Hill on behalf of the town. But he says often, ask the legislature for what it is you want. Don't ask for one thing, thinking that the legislature in its infinite wisdom will figure out that what you really want is something else. Ask for what you want.
Neil, did you want to say something about consider alternatives to warrant articles and whether a warrant article is really necessary? Because that's the important point on the bottom of that screen we just had up there.
Yes, not everything requires a warrant article. There are changes in Brookline that can be done as a matter of policy by the select board. There are changes that could be done by the town administrator. If you have an idea for improving the town website by moving a button from over here to over there, you don't need to bring a warrant article to that. Sometimes you can just ask someone in IT. Is it would it be hard to do this because this is confusing, right? You don't need to bring warrant articles because something is misspelled somewhere. If you want to change a bylaw, right, actually change the law in Brookline, that you have to bring an article, a warrant article. But there are opportunities to go to public comment rather at a select board meeting or any other board, committee, and commission, and not file a warrant article for a resolution that would be non-binding anyway. Particularly if you're going to ask the select board to do something, if it doesn't need to be in a public way. There are other ways to ask the select board to form a committee to study something. One way to do that is just to ask the select board members if they would form a committee to study something. And if 3 of them will say yes, you might get your committee without having to go through the warrant article process. So let me run through the post-filing technical side, otherwise known by some as the gauntlet. right? I've got to go through the gauntlet. This goes back to respect the process. The select board and the advisory committee, by bylaw, are obligated to take up and consider every article in the warrant. If you're a petitioner, you have one. If you're the advisory committee, you may have 30. If you're the select board, you get the same 30. And they can be subject to multiple hearings. They're subject to amendment. The select board may hear an article. The advisory committee then hears it, makes amendments, and the select board may have to take it up again for discussion. If you're the petitioner, part of the process is participating in the process. Nobody's there to punish you. It's the serious business of town government and how we make the laws in Brookline. The advisory subcommittees, curiously enough, are broken down for the most part so that they can review budgets of the various departments. That's not universally true, but there is, for example, the schools subcommittee, the administration and finance subcommittee, and so on. The subcommittees do double and triple duty, and sometimes the imbalance of warrant articles don't lend themselves to any particular subcommittee, or a subcommittee may be overburdened because of the nature of items in the warrant. So don't be confused if your warrant article that has nothing to do with schools goes to the school subcommittee, or has nothing to do with public safety goes to the public safety subcommittee. It's just the way that the cards are dealt out in order to make most efficient use of the advisory committee's members and the subcommittee's time. And trust that the chair of the advisory committee does what he can to make sure that there is some relevant expertise relating to your warrant article on the subcommittee. The discussion, and so the subcommittees go first. They will make a recommendation, write up a report that goes to the full advisory committee. The subcommittees have public hearings. The public can come. You can line up support and have people come and testify on your behalf. Subcommittee meetings tend to be relatively casual. The small subcommittees are 3 to 5, sometimes a little bit more members. They can be chatty. That will be followed by a discussion and recommendation in the meeting by the full advisory committee. The full advisory committee, with limited exception, does not have a public hearing, does not take comment, will allow a petitioner to make a presentation, but will not typically get into a debate with the petitioner. It's a discussion and then a recommendation by the advisory committee to town meeting. Understand as well, as Sean said, the warrant is a warning, and your warrant article is a warning of an agenda item on a specific subject. Once it's in the warrant, and I have a warrant article that I've drafted. Once that's submitted and is in the warrant, that is not my warrant article. I can't withdraw it, and anybody is free to move it or move it in an amended fashion or offer an amendment, both editorial and substantive, so long as it's within the scope. And the advisory committee and the select board as well, and to some extent, other boards, committees, and commissions and individual town meeting members are free to offer amendments of that sort, including and other motions, including a motion to refer, which is essentially this may seem like a good idea, but it's not quite ready for prime time, and can either the select board or the moderator appoint a committee, study this for a while, and then bring it back perhaps in better form with recommendations.
Neil, Anthony Bono has another question.
Sure.
Sorry, just got the message too. I just typed in the chat for the next one, but I'm sure I'll have another one. I'll do that for that one. So if it goes on the warrant, I can't change it once it's on the warrant. I understand that part. To offer an amendment, how does that process work?
Okay. So quickly, there is as you approach town meeting, a time window, right? That says 48 hours or longer in the case of some articles. It's a deadline set by the moderator, but it is intended to give the advisory committee and the select board time to consider the amendment, right? And so if it's a modest amendment, it's something that the advisory committee might be able to take up by scheduling a meeting. Advisory committee will meet just before every night of town meeting, or at least schedule for that sort of business in case some last minute thing comes up. If you have an amendment in mind because something should be changed or you think it should be changed, the earlier the better. There's no reason to hold on to it.
Gotcha.
There's no political advantage to waiting, and in some cases, significant political disadvantage to saying, I've known about this for a long time. It's a major change. I'm going to bring it at the last minute because I think, oh, that's smart. It doesn't end well.
To elaborate just a little bit on what Neil was saying, I would say that most changes to warrant articles, and changes are possible even if the petitioner can't say, I changed my mind, occur during their process of consideration by the advisory committee, by the select board, and by other boards and committees and commissions. And most of the time, what will happen is that going through, particularly the advisory committee, the subcommittee, and the full advisory committee process will lead to some changes. Members of the subcommittee and the committee will say, I think this would be better if we struck paragraph 3 or changed 80% to 50% or whatever. And what comes out as the recommended motion from the advisory committee of the select board will be different from what originally appeared on the warrant. There are still some amendments that come up for the first time at town meeting, but they're relatively few compared to the many changes that occurred during the process. Sometimes the advisory committee or the subcommittee will say, will you accept this as a petitioner, as a friendly amendment? But as Neil said, it's not the petitioner's property. The article can be amended by the advisory committee, whether the petitioner likes it or not. And the petitioner has the opportunity to then go ahead and make his or her own motion at town meeting that may not be the same as the advisory committee's motion or select board's motion, or they can say, we agree with that motion, we now support it. So this is the complicated process of evolution and amendment and discussion. And I just want to reiterate what Neil said about respecting the process. As a petitioner, and I've been a petitioner, you always think that your article is brilliant, important, absolutely necessary, and 100% right.
In the case of Sean's articles,
to various boards and committees that they tell you it has to be changed in so many ways, and they give you different pieces of advice, and they keep raising awkward questions, and that's just part of our process. This is legislation we're writing. It might be in the bylaws for years, and it will have an effect on people's lives. And I will say, it's not just the average citizen who gets, raked over the coals and gets these difficult questions. It can be town officials. This is a matter of public record that the town clerk filed a warrant article for the most recent town meeting regarding the ability of the town clerk to make changes to the bylaws, to fix typos, inconsistencies, and so on. It began its way through the vetting process, and there was a fairly widespread reaction that it needed more work. He accepted that and went back and said, I will not be making a motion. I'll refile this in the future, taking into account these suggestions. And there's another little wrinkle on that too. Some of those suggestions, which were very good, could not be made while remaining within the scope of the article, which was all the more reason to bring it back for the next town meeting, because sometimes that just happens. The one thing that will improve an article a lot is deemed by the moderator to be beyond the original scope. and it cannot be, offered as an amendment, at least not at that town meeting.
So the select board process is similar to the advisory committee process, but there are no subcommittees, but they will also, on every warrant article, hold a public hearing, make a recommendation. And the select board also is free to recommend amendments, editorial and substantive, or refer for further study. So that's parallel to the advisory committee and independent of the advisory committee's recommendation and meetings. The moderator holds the gap.
There's one caveat here, because we've just amended the bylaws to enable the select board to maybe not consider resolutions, but to focus on bylaw amendments, home rule petitions,
Yes.
financial question.
Yeah,
That has just been approved by the Attorney
right.
General.
And in
We'll
the
see how
technical-
the select board deals with that.
But in the technical wiggle, they actually have to take it up to decide not to take it up. The moderator is the sole authority when it comes to ruling on scope, and the moderator also is the sole authority on determining and advising town meeting, obviously with the input from town council and others on the legality of a warrant article. If in the moderator's opinion an article is illegal, it will still come to the floor, it will still be discussed, but the town meeting will be advised that the article is in the decision of the moderator of questionable legality. It's happened before. Scope is the moderator's call. Sometimes it appears subjective. It is the moderator's call. Keep in mind, when you are drafting a warrant article, the issue of scope, and I'll give you an example. I brought an article several years ago to amend the sign bylaw in town. The sign bylaw prohibits the placement of signs on town property, with some exceptions, meaning signs put up by the town, for example, can be placed on town property. But private signs, you're not free to post. It's been the town's cultural process of allowing on election day signs at the polls. They go up at night and you wake up in the morning and there are all these signs, and then they stay there for the day. Well, that was actually illegal. And so I brought a warrant article that would allow placing of signs from call it sunset the night before until the polls close, to make it legal, so that a town clerk in the future, or someone who just wanted to enforce the sign bylaw, couldn't say no more signs at the polls. Sorry, you're running for office, too bad, no signs at the polls. In discussing that warrant article, several people said, well, why only at the polls? Some schools have signs because they're polling places, but what about the other schools? Shouldn't people know that there's an election and who's running? And, what about the library? We have signs at Putterham and Coolidge Corner because they're polling places, but not at the Brookline Village. And I said, yeah, maybe that's something town meeting might want to consider. When I actually drafted the warrant article, I drafted it for whatever distance is up to 500 feet from a polling place. And the last thing I put in was, or any other place in town. Any other place in town was a scope holder only. I never intended any other place in town, but it protects scope. The broadest scope warrant article filed is the budget. When the budget comes out, it's 85 pages worth of warrant articles in incredible detail. The article as it is printed in the warrant pretty much says we're going to have a budget. We'll appropriate some amount of money to run the town. That's what's printed in the warrant. Everything that happens to the budget after that is within scope. As Sean said, other boards may weigh in. They will let you know. But depending upon what your warrant article covers, By the way, you may want them to weigh in, so ask.
Hey, Neil.
The key thing too,
Yeah.
Neil, Bernard has a question. Can you go back and address alternatives to warrant articles? A very important issue. And there is a comment by Ernie. Ernie, if everyone could just read that in the comments.
Yeah, so let me go back to alternatives in terms of not what the alternatives are, but what the process is. And so if you want something to change, which is pretty good reason to want to file a warrant article. If you have a conversation with someone in a leadership position, like the chair of the select board in the case of who just asked this question, and say, I'm thinking that this is an issue that should be addressed by the town. I'm thinking of bringing it to town meeting. Are there other ways to solve this problem? Have that conversation, because there may in fact be other ways to solve that problem. In some cases, the answer is no, because there's activity, there are activities that are in the bylaw that are illegal and would need to be removed. But for something that doesn't exist, that you would like done, if you want to extend the hours that the libraries are open, talk to a library trustee, because they can do that without a warrant article. Those conversations can lead you to the alternatives to bringing a warrant article. The other thing is not everything needs to be brought to town meeting in the form of a resolution to create awareness. You can create awareness by by writing a letter to Brookline News. You can create awareness by going to the podium, virtual or otherwise, at the select board. So those kinds of alternatives, you don't have to think of yourself. Just have that conversation with people who can brainstorm with you and see if, in fact, you need to file a warrant article. You file a warrant article, you're committing yourself, the advisory committee, the select board, several employees on the 6th floor, the moderator, town council, and others to a reasonable amount of work they're happy to do, but it's a lot of work in a defined tight period of time.
Thank you, Neil. We also have a question from John Rumpler.
Hey, Neil.
Hey, John.
Hi, how are you? Thanks so much for this presentation. I just had a question about scope. I was thinking about what you were saying earlier, that the purpose of the warrant article is literally to warn the town and town meeting members, like, here's what we're going to be discussing. Is it fair to say that a way to think about scope is, did town meeting members have fair advance warning that the thing you're proposing would be discussed? Is that the right way to think about scope?
Yeah, that's the right way to think about it. Your comment's a little bit narrow, because the broader is not, it goes beyond town meeting members. Broadly, it's members of the public.
Right, got it.
To use Sean's example, of bringing a warrant article to change setbacks north of Beacon Street, or north of wherever Sean's example, in North Brookline, let's call it North Brookline. And you pick up the warrant and you say, oh, gee, I'm not a town meeting member. I just live in South Brookline. And good for them. I don't care, because it's not going to affect my house, right? And then someone brings an amendment that says, let's extend this to include South Brookline, right? And then you wake up in the morning, absent a scope limitation, you wake up and you find out that town meeting just changed the zoning for your street. You go, wait a minute, nobody told me, right? That's not fair. So it's fundamentally what's fair, right? What's a fair warning, and that's what scope does.
Thanks, Neil.
before we move on to the next slide, just on the last line on this one, I'd like to add one thing about the other boards, etc. Usually the select board and the advisory committee are the major committees that discuss warrant articles. But if you bring a zoning bylaw amendment, say you want to allow for more multifamily buildings to be constructed in Brookline, a major topic at our most recent town meeting, of course, you're likely to have to take that article to hearings before the planning board, the zoning bylaw committee, the housing advisory board might weigh in. The Economic Development Advisory Board too might have an interest in making a recommendation. And maybe even the Preservation Commission would hold a hearing and convey its recommendation to town meeting. And it's not impossible that the Diversity Commission, the Commission on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations, would think that it had a stake in that warrant article and should hold a hearing. So just bear that in mind. If you want to change zoning, many more committees or boards will weigh in, and they should. They have a different set of expertise, and they have valid reasons for being concerned about changes to zoning.
Sean, whose turn is it?
I'll take it if you don't want to. We've covered some of these issues before.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think how often we can't say respect the process too much, no matter how onerous it seems and how difficult it seems to navigate. If you're a petitioner, you will be asked to appear before multiple boards, committees, and subcommittees between the time you file your warrant article and town meeting. And you have to steer between being the only petitioner and not being able to get around to all those committees and having too many petitioners, so it becomes confusing as to who is really responsible. Often having 2 or 3 people who are prepared to speak before a committee is best. And the scheduling is never easy, especially for the advisory subcommittees. And so having that flexibility so that someone can be there when it's convenient for the committee is good. Otherwise, it becomes very frustrating for everybody to try to come up with a good time to have that hearing and maybe subsequent meetings to consider a warrant article. Neil's touched on some of this before. Nothing stops you from contacting the members of any board or committee that's going to consider your warrant article and to try to make the case before you go to the public hearing. There may be, in some cases, particular town bodies that will be more likely to support you. I just gave you a long list of particular options, but would, for example, the Diversity Commission be your ally or not on a particular warrant article? If they are going to potentially support it, then talk to them. And that goes for any committee that has the discretion as to whether to consider a warrant article or not. There are lots of groups in town proliferating all the time that make recommendations on warrant articles. Some of them, email town meeting members. Some of them send out mailings. You'll have to decide which ones are most likely to support you. But if you can get support from a wide spectrum, you're in great shape. But at the very least, go to the groups that you think are the logical supporters of your warrant article and see if they will endorse it and communicate that to their members. This is all part of the political process to try to come up with the best case and the broadest base of support for your article. And you have to take it into account, as well as all the technical requirements of getting the language right and reviewed by town council and so on.
And some of that, circling back, can take place early when you're first considering filing a warrant article. If you have an article that's an environmental article and you've not reached out to members of Green Caucus, for example, and only by example, members of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board, others active, Brookline Green Space Alliance, reach out to them because they may have a different approach. And they say, well, I wish you would have filed it this way rather than that way. and it's too late because you're past the filing deadline. And what they recommend now is outside the scope. And you have an article that's not going to get the support that you might have gotten. I want to go back up a couple of lines. Beware of listing too many co-petitioners. This has gotten popular to list, in effect, supporters. It's confusing as all get-go to those who try and schedule meetings with petitioners. If you are, it's okay to have a partner, a co-sponsor, co-petitioner. I'll give you this advice. There is no better way to frustrate the advisory committee and lose a friend than to have an advisory subcommittee go through, have a discussion, talk about amendments, have someone agree to language, sort of negotiate in a friendly way more often than not. You get to the end, you agree on language, and you hear, I just need to check with my co-petitioner. Excuse me? You don't have the authority to be negotiating with the advisory committee, and sometimes it comes back a week later. Sorry, they don't agree. So now we don't have an agreement. It's quite frustrating for those of us who have multiple warrant articles to deal with. If you go in a partner, either have the authority when you get to the advisory committee or the select board, or say up front, my partner couldn't make it. I'll do the best I can, but I'm going to have to circle back.
Neil, I know you've actually introduced warrant articles on this question, or at least one warrant article on having a lead petitioner. But I do think it helps if you make it clear there are two lead petitioners, and those are the people who will be going to committees and making the presentation and discussing potential amendments. You can list other people if you like, if you want to show that other people support it, but it has to be clear that there are two people who have responsibility, and when the committee wants to schedule its hearing, they're the ones who should be contacted.
You can also put in your warrant article explanation. Remember, you've gotten 10 signatures on your petition, at least, and there's nothing to stop you from putting into your warrant article explanation that, this warrant article is supported by Sean Lynn-Jones, former chair of the advisory committee and member of, all sorts of important boards, committees, and commissions. That's fair game. What's up next? The technical part of town meeting. Articles are generally taken up in the order they're printed in the warrant, starting with 1 and going through. There are exceptions. We have exceptions where there may be an out-of-town interested party who is not a town meeting member and is not going to be sitting through 4 or 5 nights of town meeting and would really like to know when that particular item is coming up. We have occasion where we have speakers who are students who, for the same reason, shouldn't have to sit through an entirety of town meeting. Those warrant articles may be scheduled. Actually changing the order is a vote of town meeting. It almost always passes, and it almost without controversy. If town meeting convenes on Tuesday, to have a motion that says we'll move to take up Article 14 as the first order of business on Thursday, whatever date that is. So that happens. If you have a special consideration because you have someone who is otherwise not available, contact the moderator, and more notice is always better than less notice. The speaker's order, typically the petitioner goes first. And then at the discretion of the moderator, you'll hear reports from the advisory committee, the select board, and others, perhaps the planning board. Speakers generally alternate as the moderators practice pro and con. Although if you are the petitioner and you ask for extra time, you can divide that time and you can insert 2 or 3 speakers in a row. Otherwise, the time allocated tends to shift. The standard is 3 minutes if you sign up to speak. And by the way, you need to sign up to speak even if you're the petitioner. It's town meeting members generally. If you want to speak at town meeting, let the moderator know what article you want to speak on and whether you're speaking pro or con. Even if you are the petitioner, you need to let the moderator know you're going to be speaking on your warrant article. Don't be disappointed if you've lined up speakers and after a long enough debate, whatever that means, someone calls the question, a 2/3 majority vote ends the debate, and your speakers don't get to make their points. So if you're lining up speakers, make sure that the points that need to be made are made early, because they may not get to the floor of town meeting. In terms of voting, amendments and other motions are voted first, and then the final vote, unless there's a referral, is referred to as the main motion, and that will be the main motion, could be as printed in the warrant, or will be the main motion possibly as moved, or it may be the main motion as it's been amended, depending upon the result of earlier votes. One thing about speakers, you can line up speakers who are on your side, speakers who support you, and you can know who those are. You will not be told who is speaking against your warrant article. You can arrange the order of speakers for those in favor of your warrant article with their consent. You can't go to the moderator and say, please do them in this, do them in this order, right? But if you have 5 people in support of your warrant article and you wanted them to go in a particular order and they agree, the moderator will almost always accommodate that. I'll keep going. Sean, interrupt me whenever you feel.
I'll just add one point here. I think you can go through this pretty easily, Neil. We will, of course, have a new moderator for the upcoming town meeting, and none of these issues are guaranteed to remain the same. We've had a past pattern of how moderators have dealt with speakers, and we can assume that will probably continue. But it's really all up to the moderator to make those decisions. And it has been extraordinarily useful and helpful to enable petitioners or floor managers to structure the order of speakers on both sides of warrant articles for town meeting, instead of having the moderator do it on a more random or first come, first served basis. But we expect it will continue.
So in terms of speaking, the standard now is, unless arrangements are made with the moderator, you're going to get 3 minutes to speak, even as petitioner. If you need more and your warrant article deserves it, you'll get more. 5 minutes is pretty easy to get. Some people, knowing that they have 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes to speak, can get up, talk, and cover the points that they need to make and be finished in the 3, 4, or 5 minutes. Some need to write notes on their hand with little bullet points, and some, and this is my case, need to read a speech, because if I don't read my remarks, I will either forget what I want to say, not make all my points, or make 2 out of 12 points, and the moderator says, you got 15 seconds left, please conclude. We've seen that happen, where those who come with slideshows and not a speech get to slide 1 and run out of time, and the other 12 slides are just left in wonder. It's line up your speakers, notify the moderator, and as I said, you can decide the order of your speakers with their consent. You won't know who signed up against you. Good practice, and this is my hint. I prepare my remarks for the advisory subcommittee as a 3-minute speech. I then use the same remarks edited to the full advisory committee, the same remarks edited to the select board, and then the same remarks if I happen to address another board, committee, or commission. And then in edited fashion, by the time I get to town meeting, it's a speech I've given in public 4 times. It's well rehearsed, and I know I can finish it in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. After is straightforward. Your warrant article passes, you do your happy dance on the floor of town meeting. But bylaw amendments go to the Attorney General for approval. They will rule whether they are legal or not within the authority of the town or not. Home rule petitions go first to the select board. They need to write a letter and get that letter to someone in the delegation to go to Beacon Hill. Home rule petitions can't be introduced as legislation without a petition from the select board. The political side, your article may fail or it may be referred to a committee. If you're passionate, don't give up. Don't reintroduce the same warrant article 6 months later thinking you're going to get a different result. But listen to the debate. Find out what the perceived flaws were. They'll be well articulated in the combined reports and the reports of the advisory committee and the select board. And come back and give it another try, or find an alternative that doesn't have to be a warrant article. But don't give up. It may be a setback, but it's not a defeat. Where board, committee, commission, or legislative action is required, stay involved. Town meeting passed it, great, but it's a resolution asking the select board to do something. Will they remember to do it if you don't care to come to the podium and remind them? Maybe yes, maybe no. If there's a moderators committee formed to take up a subject that you were passionate enough about to bring a resolution asking for a moderators committee, perhaps it'd be a good idea to show up at the committee's meetings every once in a while and show that you really care about your issue. Same with legislative action on Beacon Hill. There have been home rule petitions in the past. They passed, and the lead petitioner never contacts the rep. You know how there, you know, our delegation is passionate about representing the town, but they could use a little assistance every once in a while too. Stay involved.
On that point, Neil, if this kind of goes back to decisions you make as a petitioner during town meeting, sometimes it's a very difficult judgment, but you have to decide, will this fail, and would it be better to support referral and have a process that goes forward and maybe improves the article into something the town meeting will adopt in the future. And it's very hard to do the head count to know if an article will pass or fail, but you get a sense from listening to people and looking at what's posted online. And sometimes if it's going to be close, or if you think it's got some opposition, supporting referral is a better way to move forward to get the best possible result in the end. And the same goes for whether as a petitioner you agree to amendments and decide that you're going to just support the amended version as your own motion, or you oppose them. We had a recent warrant article to create an Office of Housing Stability here in the town. It went through a lot of the process and changed. I'm not sure if the original version would have passed in town meeting or not. But in the end, the petitioner worked with the various committees, and it ended up that the amended version, revised quite substantially, passed overwhelmingly, and we now have an Office of Housing and Stability here in the town as a result. All of these are difficult judgments, but I guess the basic recommendation is respect the process and don't trip over your ego too much as you try to get a good idea implemented.
Yeah, let me give you another example of a political and not technical side. So when the town introduced from the planning department a proposed solution, recommended zoning change to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. And there were several of us not thrilled with the town's proposal. And there was petitioned a warrant article to form a moderators committee to study alternatives to the plan as originally proposed by the town. That warrant article was never moved at town meeting because in the interim, the select board formed a committee to do what the moderators committee was going to be asked to do, which was to study potential alternatives. And by the way, several of the petitioners of that warrant article ended up on the select board committee appointed by the select board. And what happened, in fact, is that what was voted on at town meeting was an alternative plan that required a special town meeting in order to be within scope, but resulted in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act, and separately a substantial change in zoning on Harvard Street, passed by a comfortable margin at town meeting. And much of that was political process and not technical process. And I think we're open to questions, comments, clarifications, thoughts, and otherwise.
And Ernie has put some very important comments in the chat as well.
If I might, I made a comment regarding a discussion of warrant articles with those who might not be too much supportive of it. We've had warrant articles come before town meeting that have had a negative impact on businesses, and the businesses were not brought into the discussion prior to town meeting, or at least that was my perception. And I'm wondering if either of our speakers wish to elaborate on that or reinforce or say, I don't know what I'm talking about.
So Ernie knows what he's talking about, and I'll choose, since he gave me multiple choice, I'll choose reinforce. It's not the best moment at an advisory subcommittee meeting when you're trying to change someone's business because you're changing zoning, to ban the sale of fur, to ban plastic bags. That came to town meeting. We banned the use of plastic bags. When a question is asked, have you spoken to any of the stores in town as to what impact this is going to have on their business? No is not the best answer. They may not be thrilled, but they don't get to decide. Town meeting gets to decide. But you can at least have the conversation that says, yes, I spoke to them. Yes, it's going to impact their business. This is what they think it's going to cost. And then town meeting is in a position, the advisory committee and select board making a recommendation can at least say, this is what it's going to cost them, and we think it's worth it. no is just not the best answer for, have you spoken to somebody who's going to be impacted by this? And now that may be a business, that may be the town clerk. You know, you want the town clerk to do something and you're going to put it into a warrant article, you know, have the courtesy of talking to the town clerk first, because somebody's going to ask you if you did. You know, have you spoken to you know, the commissioner, the head of this department? I can go on and on. No is just not a good answer.
It goes beyond just, you know, businesses and departments, which are very important to consult, but, you know, it's downright embarrassing when you have a zoning amendment for a particular part of town, and then, you know, 30 people who live there come and say they've never heard of it, they think it's a terrible idea, and why didn't you talk to them before you brought it to town meeting? And one can go on and on with that kind of example, but this has to be a consultative process, and there are obviously different interests, but not even asking the people who are going to be most affected is a problem.
And you don't need their permission.
Oh.
Well, thank you, Sean and Neil. This was a very informative presentation. If we don't have any other questions, we'll just wrap it up. Again,
So I'll leave you with one comment, and Sean can opt out of this. I doubt that he will. If you have questions on this presentation, if you have questions on the process, if you're thinking of filing a warrant article and you want to reach out, call me, call Sean, call both of us. As I said, Sean can opt out. I just volunteered him, but I think he's okay.
It's absolutely okay to volunteer me, Neil. In fact, just the other day, I got a call from a town meeting member who has proposed many warrant articles in the past about a new idea. And we spoke for over half an hour about all of the issues affected with his idea. And so I would certainly be happy to do that for anyone else who wants to email me to ask, you know, what do you think of this idea and how could we do it? And I'll just give you a general, you know, idea of what it was, because it's a very important topic. And it even relates to some of the things you said at the very end of the presentation, Neil. What can we do to make sure that there is follow-up and that we implement and enforce the bylaws that we vote on at town meeting? And some things happen and then they disappear and you never are sure exactly what's going on. Is there a better way we can make sure that we follow through when town meeting takes a vote? So maybe you'll see that on the warrant.
Lastly, thank you to the hosts for this program.
Very
Thank you for giving us the Sean and I the platform.
And to Big too.
And to Big too.
Yes, well, we'd like to thank both of you, Sean and Neil, the TMA, the League, and Big for all the hard work that gets to put all a presentation like this together. And for those members of the Town Meeting Association, stay tuned for our February Town Meeting Member Association, which will be announced later. I guess February starts tomorrow, so it'll be announced later in February.
Okay, and like Diana has a question, or she has her hand up.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just want to thank the Town Meeting Members Association and the presenters. It was very, very informative. So I'm very happy that we did this. And the League is collaborating with different organizations in town, but we definitely have planned as town meeting and elections approach to do candidates forums, town meeting warrant article forums to educate the general public about what's coming up. And then we always do our annual voters guide in preparation for the May elections in town, which is available in an online version, the Vote 411, and the print version, the voters guide. So we will be following along in a parallel track to help educate voters about everything that you're talking about. So thank you very much. And thanks to Big for all the work they've done here.
Thank you, Diana.
Yes,
So-
and Carlos, if I could say one more thing, if
Mhm.
for the next few Town Meeting Member Association meetings, if anyone has any ideas for other workshops, please contact Carlos or me. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, everybody have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all very much.